Christmas, everyone. Please open with me the Gospel according to Matthew, chapter 2, beginning verses from 1 to 12. There you will see the wise men from the east. The Greek word for this eastern wise man is called magi, which is the root word for our English word magician. But don't confuse this with our concept of magic today. They were apparently scholars who studied the stars, and they have the distinct honor of being the first Gentiles to seek Christ. With their Eastern background, they were open to supernatural occurrences like the star that led them to Bethlehem. In the West, we sometimes overly scientific in our approach to God. By and large, the Western Church has been overly influenced by the scientific method. However, one of the acceptable tenets of postmodernism is the fact that everything cannot be explained by the scientific method. You cannot test everything in a laboratory. Who can understand or explain in human terms the Trinity, the Incarnation, miracles, or the resurrection of Jesus? This is not to say that there is not scientific and historical evidence for belief in Christianity. All true science and history point to the validity of the claims of the Bible. What is important is that we realize that God's truth is truth, whether or not we comprehend it all. How might we capitalize on this willingness to accept the mystical in reaching out to people with Eastern religious backgrounds or postmodern Western thinkers? How do the vast numbers of individuals seeking truth by mystical practices provide a vast mission field for the church? A well-balanced approach that synthesizes both modern and postmodern thinking can be highly effective. We have the empirical evidence of support the validity of the claims of Christianity, and also the mystical storyline to attract the postmodern. We can clearly show how there is a supernatural realm, but that realm is only truly found in God's revelation to man through His written and living Word, and through a personal relationship with God through Jesus, His Son. The appearance of the star led the wise men to conclude that a king was about to be born. They followed the star a great distance to worship this king. It's likely their understanding of Christ's birth was limited to their Eastern heritage. Yet, Matthew, the Gospel writer to the Jews, includes this wonderful story. What do you think Matthew is trying to get across to his fellow Jews by including the story of these Gentiles seeking Christ? Matthew is only Gospel writer that includes this story. What is God trying to get across to us? Matthew wanted the Jews to know that Christ came to every people group on the face of the planet. God did not become man for just one race of people. Perhaps this would shame the Jews into realizing their shortcoming of rejecting Jesus as the Messiah, when others with less knowledge accepted him. Once again, we see a picture of modern versus postmodern society. Modernism has largely rejected Jesus as God based on their strict adherence to the empirical method. Modernists have knowledge, but not an open heart. Postmodernists may give their hearts away all too readily in some instances, believing in far too many mystical realms. But at least they do not judge only on one plane. The wise men were wise because they were open to these mysteries, lodging in their hearts to worship someone higher than themselves. How does the heart search of the wise man compare to the head knowledge of the Jewish high priests and scribes that Herod the Great consulted concerning the birth of this new king? The Jewish scholars could tell Herod precisely where the Old Testament scriptures predicted that the Messiah would be born. However, their non-plans indicated the hardness of their hearts. They did not go to worship the Messiah. The wise men, on the other hand, continued to follow the supernatural sign, the star, to Jesus. Herod the Great, an Idumean descendant of Esau, not a full-blooded Jew, was afraid of the announcement of the wise man that the King of the Jews was to be born. He wanted that little to himself. That is why he tried to have the Christ child killed. Matthew chapter 1 verse 13, 23. You can find it in that verses. How does this fit in with the biblical theme of the struggle between Esau and Jacob? In other words, what are some of the characteristics common to people seeking God like Jacob and the wise men versus Esau, types like Herod and the Hebrew scholars? Esau always sought the temporal. Jacob grew to understand and appreciate the eternal. Esau sold his birthright because of his worldview only had room for hair. And now, Jacob, originally a trickster himself, because Israel, one who rules with God. The wise men represent this godly character quality of Jacob, following the cry of their heart until they find God. Herod and the Hebrew scholars, like Esau, were self-absorbed like Esau. So, self-absorbed, they miss finding Jesus. When we see these characteristics in people's lives, how can we be like the star and point them to Christ? When we see others exhibiting an interest in spiritual things, we should not judge them for following the human longing to find God. Following the human longing to find God, we should lovingly point out the good news about Jesus. How is He the need of their heart? We should not exclude the many mystical components of the gospel narrative. Rather, we should point out the true part. The true part is in a personal relationship with God through His Son Jesus. We don't know that there were only 3 wise men, but we do know that brought 3 gifts to worship the King of Kings. What does this story do to the line of reasoning that says seekers don't want to hear about giving in worship? It could be that a lot of seekers have been turned off by the wrong way that giving has been presented in churches. Giving itself as an act of worship is very appealing to the heart of a true seeker, as long as it is presented spiritually and tastefully. It should not be excluded. It cannot be excluded from true worship. It was an Oriental custom to present kings with gifts. The worship of the wise men, however, seems to go further than their homage to a new king. Do you think these seekers become finders? Why? Oh, why not? They came a long way to worship Jesus by bowing down and presenting their gifts. They also obeyed the warning from God not to return to Herod with the news of Christ's whereabouts. Their actions seems to exhibit faith. Dear brothers and sisters, let's celebrate Jesus, season or out of seasons. May God bless you all. Have a Merry Christmas.